Hello, my name is Dr. Virginia Charter, and today I'm going to talk to you about introducing the idea of codes and standards and where they come from and how they're developed. This is the first series of 7 different modules of where myself and Dr. Brian Hoskins are going to talk to you about a variety of things about codes and standards and how they impact the different things like the standards processes or the standards development organizations, all those different types of things. And so today, in particular, we're going to talk about the overall intent of the standards process. We're going to identify the different types of standard development organizations. And we're also going to distinguish between model codes, installation standards, product standards, as well as then those local amendments that may come across your desk. Within the upcoming modules after this module, we're going to have a whole module talking about the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, and their process when it comes to the standards development process. The National Fire Protection Association has its own module where we'll talk about the impact that NFPA has on the standards and codes development process. The International Code Council, or ICC, we will also have a module addressing their process and how that is impacting the model codes that we have here today. Design and inspection, testing, and maintenance standards is a separate module, having particular attention to those that may be in the design, installation, or even the testing industry. We're also going to have a product standards module. This module will provide more detail on how those individual pieces and components that then go into other standards is developed. And then finally, we'll have a concluding module where Dr. Hoskins will provide all of those pieces and tie it all together and how there's an impact through NIST. NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology, is the broad organization that helps develop how these standards are put together. They oversee a lot of the different things that go on in the product standard area, and they're also a government entity under the U.S. Department of Commerce that provides a driving force for the codes and standards industry. The intent is that standards are a set of principles, protocols, or procedures that are developed by committees through a consensus process. This is a key component in all of these modules that you'll find is that there is a consensus process that is developed when NIST and standards and product standards or codes are all developed. Codes are legal documents that govern activities at a variety of levels of government. For instance, 29 CFR 1910 is a prescriptive code or legal document that drives the industry. Prescriptive in nature, they stipulate in detail the types of materials that can be used and how they must be assembled. There's also a performance criteria. This may describe an acceptable level of how that assembly material or system must meet without specifying an overarching of how the item is actually assembled. So it gives some flexibility to end users when they're developing new products. However, when we get into performance-based design, we also have to have that jurisdictional approval for the testing and acceptance criteria. There is a significant amount of expertise that may be required in order to go through that process. And so if you're thinking about working in this realm, make sure that you're very knowledgeable in both the prescriptive and the performance-based design when it comes to codes and standards. The American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, is a private or nonprofit organization that administers and coordinates the Voluntary Standardization Conformity Assessment System. That's a big sentence to really just talk about how there's a lot of consensus documents. They've put together the overarching process for how codes and standards should be developed through that consensus process of both balanced committees, public input, and then a continuously updated process, meaning they don't stay stagnant for years. It also ensures that access to these standards process is available to anyone directly and the material affected by the standard under development. And so this is important because it helps define and give the same rules to all the organizations that might be developing codes and standards such that everybody's on an even playing ground. And additionally, you'll find that even throughout these modules, there's a lot of things that are cross-referenced. Either product standards may be referenced within model building codes, or design and installation standards may then also reference other types of product standards, or model codes may reference design standards that different systems need to be designed to. And so you're going to find that this cross-referencing happens a lot. Model codes is a code that is developed and maintained by standards organizations independent of the jurisdiction responsible for enacting it. And this is an important concept, is that while there's a consensus process, it's not one jurisdiction or one state or one government that writes these codes. These codes are developed essentially by that third party independent of the jurisdiction that then adopts the code. The local governments then choose to adopt it through their legal process, through their adoption process. It contains a variety of agreed upon requirements, meaning that as the consensus process is developed, and again, we're going to have an entire module on ICC later in this series, but it gives that entire thing agreed upon by a variety of groups, of interest groups that may be involved in the model codes, and it gives a chance for that organization or that local government to then adopt that. For instance, model codes could be developed by organizations such as NFPA or ICC, and it's going to tell us when systems are required and where systems are required. It's also going to talk about different prescriptive requirements for within those model codes. But most importantly, when we talk about the development of codes and standards, when we look at product standards, it's going to say when are those product standards required, or where are these stipulations required. From there, we also have design, installation, and maintenance standards. These standards are where systems or products that may be installed are tested, inspected, maintained, and monitored throughout the life of the system. For example, if you take a look at a fire alarm system, there's going to be different pieces and components. The entire system itself goes through a long process. There's the design phase, where the system is designed to be ready to be installed. Then it's the installation phase. You'll then have initial system certification, where you'll have testing of the system to make sure that all the pieces and components work, to make sure smoke detectors or pull stations all work. And then you will have a continuous inspection, testing, and maintenance that may be done on your system. And so there are a variety of standards that impact that entire process. And so we're going to have an entire module coming up and talking about the details and how those are developed of the design, installation, and maintenance standards. Product standards is another key component in the overall fire protection engineering world, code world, as well as the built environment. Later on, we're going to talk in more detail about product standards, but if you've ever used anything, plugged it into an outlet, or if you've ever turned on something that has an on-off switch, it most likely has gone through some sort of product standard certification. They provide requirements for performance, construction, and robustness of products. What that means is that you as the end user or a consumer, when they go to use the product, they know it's gone through a rigorous process to ensure the safety of the public as well as the consumer themselves. These are third-party organizations that go through and develop these standards, so that way, again, when the end user goes to use the product, we know that it's going to be safe, or we know it's going to work when it's installed as a component within an overall system, such as a sprinkler system. What's important here is that you can see on this particular slide that there is a built-up environment in order how all product standards, codes, and installation standards all work together up to the jurisdiction that then adopts it. You start with something like the model code, developed by third-party organizations and a consensus standard among different interest groups. You then have model codes that lead into installation or design type standards as it's being built. And then product standards are again another component within those installation standards. You then have laws that adopt these variety codes and standards. And then you have the jurisdiction. Your local jurisdiction has the final say many times as to when codes are adopted locally. And again, it's not automatic. This is something that the local jurisdiction also has to stay up to date on. As quickly as they're updating codes, many times local jurisdictions may also be adopting new codes and standards within their jurisdiction. And not every jurisdiction is the same. You may be able to go down the street to another town or city and they may be under a different model code. So what's important to remember about this module is there's a lot of things coming up. We're going to talk about the overall standards process in detail in regards to the different modules. The ICC standards, we're going to talk about the NFPA process, we're going to talk about product standards processes, the overall ANSI process of product standard and code standard development through the consensus process and design and installation standards. And then we're going to wrap it all together in a concluding module so that way you'll understand how all those pieces and parts work together. We're going to talk about all the different standard development organizations that are involved. It's not just one organization. And again, because it's through consensus process, what's great about this process is that because of the variety of groups that are involved, it keeps all the balances and checks in order to make sure that not one interest group is getting everything that they want in the particular product standard. It's being checked by those that don't necessarily have a financial gain in the codes and standards process, and they're looking out for the public as the best interest. We're then going to talk more in detail about the difference between model codes, installation standards, product standards, and local amendments that then may impact your overall adoption process or design process as you're getting further into fire protection engineering or model codes and standards as you're working within those environments. So we appreciate you listening today, and we look forward to seeing you on the next module. Thank you.